Hey, what's going on there, guys? Nick here from Absolute MTG, and I'm back with another deck tech for you. Today we're going to be taking a quick look at blue-white control for the Theros season of Standard. There's a deck list down in the description below with the entire deck list that we're playing here, both main board and sideboard. There's also a deck list via TappedOut.net that you guys can check out. So if you're not familiar with anything that we're talking about here in the video, any of the cards that are in the deck, all you have to do is go on that link to TappedOut.net. You can scroll over the card names with your cursor. A little image will pop up with the card, and you can read what it does. So, blue-white control. Blue-white control is really grindy in this format right now. It's going to be a deck that pretty much deprives your opponent of everything that they're trying to do and they're trying to beat you with. So, let's take a look at the deck list, and then we'll kind of talk about where certain cards fall and what their role is. So, we have 4 Jace Architect of Thought, 1 Elspeth Sun's Champion, 4 Azorius Charm, 1 Cyclonic Rift, 1 Quicken, 4 Detention Sphere, 1 Elixir of Immortality, 4 Sphinx's Revelation, 4 Divination, 3 Dissolve, 2 Syncopate, 4 Supreme Verdict, 1 Codex Shredder, which is probably the most unusual card in here. For our land base, just so we get that out of the way, we have 4 Hallowed Fountain, 4 Azorius Guildgate, 2 Mutavault, and then 8 and 8 for our plains and islands for the split up for basics. So the way that things work here, so Jace is here because he's good for that mini factor fiction he has with his -2. He's also going to be able to allow us to kind of stabilize and stay in the game with his +1, making our opponent's creatures that are attacking a little bit smaller. Also his ultimate for the bribery for both players' decks, where we get to play something from from both players' decks, is going to be awesome as well. We get to use something from our opponent's deck that we can just smash them with. And we can also search for something like Elspeth from our own deck, and we can easily just try to grind out games from there. We do have the one Elspeth, which she makes tokens, which is going to be one of the ways that we can win. We aren't playing any creatures in the main board. We do have one AEtherling in the sideboard here, which we're going to talk about the sideboard in a bit. But Elspeth is going to make tokens for us. She's also going to be able to blow up creatures with power 4 or greater with her -3, and the ultimate gives all of our creatures +2/+2 and flying, and that is the emblem, so it just stays there forever for the game. So Elspeth's just like one of those cards that if she sticks and they can't deal with her, she's going to be a huge problem, and that's exactly what we want to have with our card quality in this type of deck. We have 4 Azorius Charms, so the Azorius Charm is going to be used basically as a form of 1-for-1 removal, where we're going to choose our opponent's creature, we're going to target our opponent's creature that's attacking or blocking, and we're going to put it on the top of their library, thus making it that 1-for-1 trade-off. We can also use it to give our creatures lifelink in the case of us needing to have lifelink off of like our Mutavaults that are attacking and our tokens, and occasionally our Aetherling if he's big enough as well. So we can use that lifelink mode. It's always there, but it's not really used as much as the 1-for-1 removal. And we can also use the Azorius Charm to cycle it so we can draw a card off of it. The Cyclonic Rift is for being able to just bounce back things that our opponents have. We can use it early on at an instant speed for 2 mana if we need to bounce a non-land permanent back, or we can overload it. With the overload, we bounce back all non-land permanents that we don't control to their owner's hands. So the Cyclonic Rift allowing us to just kind of clear our opponent's board of any big threats that they may have, any planeswalkers or anything stupid that they may be doing. Quicken, allowing us to play our next sorcery speed spell at a instant speed. It's useful for Supreme Verdict and Divination. That's basically what we have it in here for. Divination is essentially going to cost 4, where we get to draw the 2 cards off of Divination and also the 1 off of Quicken as well. Supreme Verdict is going to cost 5 mana, but at instant speed, it's going to destroy all creatures, allowing us to blow up a aggro opponent's entire board, including any Mutavaults that they may have activated and tried to beat us with. So Quicken is awesome for allowing us to have plays that are much more unexpected for our opponent, but at the same time, there's not a huge array of things that we can do with Quicken, so we don't really want to be playing a whole lot of copies of it. It's just kind of useful as a one-of. We have the playset of Detention Sphere just to be able to get rid of non-land permanents. We also get rid of the chosen non-land permanent and all other permanents with that same name. So if we're dealing with like Pack Rat and our opponent has a bunch of Pack Rats, we get rid of all of them. So we can essentially get like a 2-for-1 or even greater, depending on what our opponent's playing and how they're overextending in different situations. So the Detention Sphere just for planeswalkers, creatures, enchantments, artifacts, anything that they may have that is troublesome for us. We do have one Elixir of Immortality, so Elixir of Immortality is what is going to allow us to grind out these games. It is going to allow us to play it for 1, and for 2 mana tap, we gain 5 life, and we're going to shuffle the Elixir and our graveyard into our library. That way that we get back all the things that we've used in the game thus far, so any counter spells, wrath effects, Sphinx's Revelations, Planeswalkers, anything that's in our graveyard is just going to go back, and we have a endless use of resources for us where we're just going to be able to find answers for what our opponent's doing, where our opponent usually won't have the means of being able to do that. They won't have the means of being able to reshuffle their grave and just kind of start anew. We have the Force Sphinx's Revelation, which is pretty standard with control decks. I mean, gain X amount of life and draw X amount of cards. Great for late game. The Divination, just to draw more cards. You want to have a good amount of cards whenever you're playing a control deck, and you want to have the ability to dig into things that you need. 3 Dissolve and 2 Syncopate for our counter spells. Dissolve is just kind of our hard counter here with a set in stone casting cost, where Syncopate is going to scale based on what we need to counter and how much mana we're going to need to invest in it based on our opponent not being able to allow their thing to resolve or allowing their card to resolve, and different scenarios like that. But Syncopate, as opposed to Dissolve, Syncopate doesn't have the Scry 1, but Syncopate does exile cards instead of putting them into the grave whenever they're countered, so that's just kind of the difference between there. So if we're playing up against like Elixir of Immortality, any cards that we exile with Syncopate aren't going to be able to be got back with Elixir with that crack. And Supreme Verdict. So Supreme Verdict, just basically our board wipe for all creatures, and it can't be countered. And Codex Shredder. So the last card, Codex Shredder, is very unusual. It doesn't seem like it does anything, but it's actually one of the most awkward yet useful cards that we have. It's an artifact for 1, and it taps to mill our opponent for 1, so they put the top card of their library into their graveyard. It's useful for scry effects, so if our opponent's using any type of scry to rearrange the things that they have on top of their library, Codex Shredder is just going to blow that up. It's going to make it so that they can't really plan for their scries, and they're going to have to be a little bit more cautious with when they're going to be using their scries and what they're going to put on top, and they're going to have to play around Codex Shredder for that mill, which usually it doesn't seem like it's that much of a big deal, but it really is whenever you're messing up opponents' scries constantly. It also has an ability for 5 mana tap, and we get to sacrifice it and return target card from our graveyard to our hand. Useful in situations where we're desperate and we need to get something back, like Supreme Verdict, Sphinx's Revelation, or anything like that. When we need something that is going to help us out of a situation, Codex Shredder is going to be what we can use to just get something back and use it against our opponent in the following turn, or maybe even in the same turn if it's like extremely late game and we have a ton of mana open to do whatever we want with it. So for the sideboard, that's the last thing that we have here to talk about. The sideboard, we do have one creature, which is AEtherling. AEtherling sides in for the slower matchups, so anything where we are not expecting hyper aggro, we can side in the AEtherling for like mid-range and control. It's just another win condition for us, especially if we're expecting our opponent to play something like Slaughter Games to try to dwindle the amount of win conditions that we have with this type of a deck. We have one Jace Memory Adept, so another card that's going to side in for the slower matchups, because his 0 ability allows us to force target player to put the top 10 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So that's going to be another win condition for us for decking our opponent, but it's going to be a much faster way to do it up against the slow matchups. We have 2 Pithing Needles, so the Pithing Needle is going to allow us to name a card, and activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. So basically we're going to name things like Planeswalkers. We can also name a land that's being enchanted by Underworld Connection, so if they like are going to enchant a swamp, we can name Swamp and they can't use Underworld Connections that's enchanting that swamp, or they can't use that ability that Underworld Connections gives it. But any like good activated abilities that aren't mana abilities on cards, Pithing Needle is going to be able to deal with it. Glare of Heresy, so being able to exile white permanents. So decks that are running a lot of white permanents, we can just side in the Glare of Heresy to be able to concretely deal with their cards. It's also useful for Detention Sphere when we're in the control matchup as well. So Glare of Heresy is going to allow us to get around that. Last Breath, we're playing 3 Last Breath, and this is a card for the aggro matchups, especially hyper aggro. So for 2 mana, exile target creature with power 2 or less, its controller gains 4 life. So useful for being able to get around a lot of different cards in aggro. It's also useful for things like Nightveiled Spectre and Grey Merchant of Asphodel as well. So it, instead of destroying it, it exiles it so they can't recur it with Whip of Erebos as well. So it's another kind of useful yet small intricacy of Last Breath. We have Negate, being able to counter target non-creature spells, so useful for matchups where our opponent's playing a lot of non-creature spells, mainly like mid-range and control. And Dispel. So Dispel is for being able to counter instant speed spells. So 1 blue, counter target instant speed spell, and it's just going to be up against things like Sphinx's Revelation that our opponent's playing, counter spells that our opponents have, and things of that nature, mainly for control. Probably more than anything is what we have the Dispel side in for. We do have 1 Sundering Growth, so essentially we're casting it for double white, and we get to destroy target enchantment or artifact, and we get to populate, which the populate doesn't really play into things that often. It can play into Elspeth, but really what we want to have it here for is just the ability to destroy artifacts or enchantments whenever we need to. So whether it's like a Pithing Needle that our opponent has, or something like Whip of Erebos or Underworld Connections, Sundering Growth is really useful to just be able to blow things up for double white. And Blind Obedience. Blind Obedience is the last card that we have here in the sideboard, in our 15-card sideboard. So we get the ability to extort for 2 mana out of an enchantment, and artifacts and creatures your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, thus rendering our opponent's creatures with haste pretty much useless the turn that they come out. But being able to extort, and whenever we cast a spell we can pay 1 white. If we do, each opponent's going to lose 1 life and we gain that much life. It's pretty nice for being able to stabilize in a lot of different scenarios that our opponent may put us in, which is exactly how we want to dig our way out of the aggro matchups. So that is our deck tech for blue-white control for the Theros season of Standard. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, I would appreciate it if you thumbs up the video and subscribe to the channel for more Magic the Gathering content. If you guys enjoyed this video and would like to see more Magic the Gathering content, you can hit the subscribe button on the screen and you'll be notified whenever a new video is available. And for those of you guys that enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can check out my Yu-Gi-Oh! Channel by clicking on the video in the top right-hand corner. Also, be sure to check out our sponsors for the channel, ABU Games and Europe's MTG Madness, for all of your Magic the Gathering needs, no matter where you are.